It is February 13th, 1258. A man walks out of the greatest city on earth to beg for his life. His name is Al-Mustasim Billah. He is the 37th Caliph of the Abbasid dynasty, the commander of the faithful, the spiritual sovereign of Sunni Islam. His lineage stretches back 500 years, to the very companions who walked beside the Prophet Muhammad himself. His ancestors built an empire that once reached from the Atlantic to the borders of China. His predecessors commissioned the greatest libraries the world had ever known. They funded the scholars who named the stars. They paid for mathematics the modern world still runs on. Now he walks through rubble. The gates behind him hang from shattered hinges. The walls that sheltered 1 million lives, walls that stood for 500 years, lie in heaps of pulverized stone. 14 days of unceasing bombardment have reduced them to gravel and memory. Smoke drifts through streets that no longer look like streets. Collapsed rooftops block the alleyways. Fires still smolder in neighborhoods where no one remains alive to put them out. The air tastes of ash, of sulfur, of something worse, the copper tang of blood that has soaked into the ground for days. Behind him, 1 million souls hold their breath, crammed into broken homes, huddled in mosques with cracked domes, pressed against walls and darkened passages. They are terrified. They are starving. They are waiting to learn one thing. Whether they live or die, every answer lies ahead, not behind. Ahead of him, across the killing ground where siege engines stand like the bones of monstrous birds, a silk-draped tent waits. Inside that tent sits a man who has already erased every city foolish enough to resist his armies. Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, prince of the Mongol Empire. He has traveled 4,000 miles for this moment. He has spent 2 full years preparing. He has assembled the largest army the Mongol Empire has ever deployed in a single campaign, more than 100,000 warriors of the steppe. To that force he has added something no previous Mongol commander possessed in such numbers. 1,000 Chinese siege engineers, men who carry technologies of destruction more advanced than anything the Islamic world has ever faced. Counterweight trebuchets capable of hurling 200-pound stones with shattering accuracy. Explosive projectiles packed with gunpowder. Incendiary weapons that spray burning naphtha across stone walls. Tunneling techniques that collapse fortifications from below. But the weapons alone are not what make this army terrifying. It is what this army has already done. Hulagu has accomplished what no power in 2 centuries could manage. He has annihilated the legendary order of assassins at their mountain stronghold of Alamut, a fortress called impregnable for 150 years. It fell in 3 weeks. He has destroyed cities whose very names were once synonyms for civilization. Samarkand, Bokhara, Nishapur, each one reduced to corpses and silence. Every city that surrendered, spared. Every city that resisted, annihilated. The pattern never varied. The message never changed. Now he has come for the greatest of them all. The Caliph approaches. His black robes, the sacred color of the Abbasid dynasty, worn by every commander of the faithful for 5 centuries, drag through the dust. His hands tremble. Mongol soldiers line the path on both sides. Silent, still, watching. The walk from the shattered gate to the command tent takes nearly an hour. He lowers himself to the ground before the Mongol throne. Witnesses will later say he weeps openly. He offers treasure beyond reckoning. Gold, gemstones, bolts of silk. The accumulated fortune of 500 years. Everything his dynasty ever gathered. He begs for the lives of his people. He reminds Hulagu that Baghdad is the sacred seat of Islam, that to violate it will summon divine vengeance upon the Mongol Empire. Hulagu, by every account, smiles. What follows over the next 7 days becomes one of the most complete acts of destruction in recorded history. The Mongol army does not conquer Baghdad. They unmake it. They slaughter so many that the Tigris River runs red with blood for miles downstream. They throw so many manuscripts into the water that the river turns black with dissolved ink. They burn libraries holding hundreds of thousands of works: philosophy, medicine, astronomy, mathematics, poetry, humanity's accumulated wisdom across millennia gone, turned to ash and pulp and blackwater. When the killing stops, the city that served as the intellectual capital of the earth is a graveyard. The Islamic Golden Age, 5 centuries of scientific discovery, artistic brilliance, and philosophical courage that placed the Muslim world at the vanguard of human civilization, dies in those 13 days. And humanity has never recovered what was lost. But here's the question that matters. The question no one answers properly. The question that should keep you awake tonight. How does the greatest city on earth fall in 13 days? How does a civilization that invented algebra, named the stars, preserved the wisdom of ancient Greece, collapse so utterly that its very libraries vanish from the face of the earth? The answer is not one thing. It is a chain of causes stretching back 500 years. Decisions by men long dead. A system hollowed out from within. A leader who could not face what was coming. And a war machine so methodical, so precise, so devastating that nothing in the known world could withstand it. To understand what the Mongols destroyed, you must first see what existed. You must witness Baghdad not under siege, but at its zenith. Not choking on smoke, but blazing with purpose. Not dying, but leading the entire human species forward. If you have ever used the number 0, this story belongs to you. If you have ever heard the word algorithm, this story began in the city you are about to enter. If you have ever walked into a hospital that treats you regardless of your wealth, that idea was born within these walls. Drop a like right now. This history shaped your world. It deserves to be heard. Because what the world built in Baghdad over 5 centuries, and what it lost in 13 days, is a wound that has never closed. And to understand that wound, you must go back before the Mongols, back before the siege, back to a time when Baghdad does not exist. Nearly 500 years before Hulagu's army darkens the horizon, there is no Baghdad. The year is 762. There is only a small village on the western bank of the Tigris, a dusty settlement. Date palms bending in dry wind. Flat ground stretching to the horizon. Heat that presses down like a hand. Merchants pass through without stopping. Travelers barely glance at it. The land looks worthless. It is not. A man named Abu Ja'far al-Mansur stands on this empty ground and sees what no one else can see. Al-Mansur is the second ruler of the newly established Abbasid dynasty. His family has just overthrown the Umayyads in a revolution soaked in blood. Now he needs a capital, not just a city, a statement, a declaration of power so total that his dynasty's authority will stand beyond challenge for centuries to come. Damascus, the old Umayyad seat, carries the stain of his enemy's memory. He will not rule from a rival's throne. He needs something conjured from the earth itself. Something entirely his own. He chooses this stretch of land between the Tigris and the Euphrates for one reason above all others. Geography. This site sits at the crossroads of the ancient world. Trade routes from China, India, Persia, Arabia, and the Mediterranean all converge at this exact point. The twin rivers provide water. Transportation. Natural defense. Whoever controls this ground controls the movement of goods, people, and ideas across 3 continents. And what Al-Mansur builds here is unlike anything the world has seen. He builds a circle. The original Baghdad is designed as a perfect ring, nearly 2 miles across. 3 concentric walls surround it. The outermost rises 60 feet and measures 44 feet thick at its base. 163 towers reinforce it at regular intervals. A deep moat fed by the Tigris encircles everything. For gates, aligned to the cardinal directions, provide the only entry. Each one is named for the great city it faces: the Kufa Gate, the Basra Gate, the Khorasan Gate, the Damascus Gate. At the exact center stands the Caliph's palace, crowned by a green dome, soaring 130 feet into the sky. Visible for miles in every direction, atop the dome, a mounted horseman cast in bronze, a weather vane that turns with the wind. The message is unmistakable. All roads lead to Baghdad. At Baghdad's heart sits the commander of the faithful. Al-Mansur names his creation Madin al-Salam, the city of peace. Within 50 years, it bursts beyond its own walls entirely, and what happens over the following century is something no one, not even Al-Mansur himself, anticipates. By the early 9th century, Baghdad erupts into a metropolis without precedent in the human experience. The circular city becomes just one district among dozens. New neighborhoods sprawl across both banks of the Tigris. Pontoon bridges link them, reconfigured as commerce demands. Caravans arrive daily from every direction. Ships dock along the riverbanks carrying cargo from ports most Europeans do not know exist. The population surges past 1 million. Hold that number. 1 million people in the 9th century. London in 1258, the year the Mongols arrive, holds roughly 40,000 souls. Paris holds perhaps 200,000. Baghdad dwarfs them both. No European city will approach this scale for another 800 years. The markets defy comprehension. In a single afternoon, a merchant can acquire Chinese silk, Indian spices, Russian furs, African ivory, Byzantine glassware, Persian carpets, Arabian horses. Entire streets are given over to a single trade, booksellers stretching for blocks, perfumers occupying whole quarters, swordsmiths hammering blades in workshops that never close. And the paper market alone employs thousands. This is the detail most people miss entirely, the detail that changes everything. After the Battle of Talas in 751, a single technology migrates from China to the Islamic world: paper. Before paper, books are rare, expensive. Parchment demands animal skins. Papyrus is fragile and difficult to produce at scale. Paper changes the equation completely. It is cheap, durable, easy to manufacture in enormous quantities. Suddenly, for the first time in human history, books can be mass-produced. Ideas can move at the speed of trade. Knowledge can be recorded and shared on a scale that no civilization has ever achieved. Baghdad seizes this moment, places itself at the center of the revolution, and the consequences reshape the world. Libraries multiply across the city. Private collectors amass tens of thousands of volumes. Wealthy patrons compete to build the largest collections. Booksellers grow rich, serving a population ravenous for knowledge. Some estimates suggest that by the 11th century, Baghdad's combined libraries hold more than 1 million manuscripts. More books than exist in all of Europe combined. But here is what truly separates Baghdad from every other city on earth, the part most people never learn. Books alone do not make a golden age. What makes Baghdad extraordinary is not how many books it holds. It is what the scholars inside those libraries do with the knowledge. In 830, a caliph named Al-Mamun does something that has never been attempted in human history. He founds the Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom. This is not merely a library, though it contains one of the greatest manuscript collections ever assembled on Earth. It is not merely a translation bureau, though dozens of scholars work in shifts to render Greek, Persian, Sanskrit, and Syriac texts into Arabic. The House of Wisdom is something new under the sun. The world's first state-funded research institution, built for a single purpose: to gather the most brilliant minds from every corner of the known world and give them one mission: preserve all human knowledge, expand it, push it further than it has ever gone. Al-Ma'mun does not care about faith. He does not care about nationality. He does not care about origin. He cares about results. Christian translators render Aristotle and Plato into Arabic. Jewish mathematicians work alongside Muslim astronomers. Persian physicians collaborate with Indian scientists. Zoroastrian scribes copy manuscripts that would otherwise be lost to time. The Caliph pays translators the weight of their completed manuscripts in gold. Read that again. The weight of the manuscript in gold. The finest minds from 3 continents answer the call, and what they produce inside these walls reshapes civilization itself. A Persian scholar named Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi works at the House of Wisdom in the early 9th century. His name gives the world a word used every single day: algorithm. His treatise on solving equations gives us another: algebra, from the Arabic al-jabr. The numerical system humanity uses right now, the digits on your screen, the numbers in your phone, including the concept of zero, is adopted from Indian sources and transmitted to the wider world through Baghdad. When European scholars encounter these numerals centuries later, it transforms Western mathematics overnight. The astronomers at the House of Wisdom correct errors in Ptolemy's ancient star catalogs. Errors that had gone unchallenged for 1,000 years. They calculate the Earth's circumference with startling precision. They build instruments, astrolabes, quadrants, celestial globes, that remain the standard tools of navigation for 700 years. The names they give to stars are still spoken by astronomers today. Aldebaran, Betelgeuse, Rigel, Vega. You have heard these names your entire life. Now you know where they came from. A Persian physician named Ibn Sina, known in Europe as Avicenna, produces a medical encyclopedia called the Canon of Medicine. It becomes the definitive textbook in European medical schools. It remains the standard for 700 years. Every physician trained in Europe between the 12th and 17th centuries learns from a book that was written in the Islamic world. And here's the part that most people in the Western world are never taught. The works of Aristotle, the intellectual bedrock of Western philosophy, are largely forgotten in Europe after the fall of Rome. Lost, unread, rotting in monastery corners where no one studies them. They survive because scholars in Baghdad preserve them, translate them, expand upon them, write commentaries that push the ideas further than the original author ever went. When Thomas Aquinas constructs his theological system in the 13th century, the intellectual architecture that shapes medieval Christianity for generations, he leans heavily on Arabic translations made in Baghdad 400 years before he is born. The European Renaissance, that celebrated rebirth of classical learning, is built on foundations laid by Muslim, Christian, and Jewish scholars working side by side in the House of Wisdom. This is the Islamic Golden Age. 4 or 5 centuries. While Europe struggles through fragmentation and intellectual contraction, Baghdad carries the torch for the entire human species. Mathematics advances from practical calculation to abstract theory. Astronomy transforms from observation to precision science. Medicine evolves from superstition and ritual to clinical practice. Philosophy grapples with questions that define Western thought for centuries after. Chemistry emerges from experimentation. Optics advances through rigorous observation. Engineering reaches new heights. Architecture achieves forms that inspire builders across 3 continents. Poetry attains a beauty that still resonates 1,000 years later. All of it centered on one city. All of it flowing through one institution. All of it sustained by one dynasty. The Abbasids, Baghdad, the House of Wisdom. For 500 years, this is the brightest light on the face of the earth. But here's what no one tells you about golden ages. They do not die because of what strikes them from outside. They die because of what rots within. And by the time the Mongols turn their eyes toward Baghdad, the rot has been spreading for 300 years. The walls still stand. The libraries still hold their manuscripts. 1 million people still call the city home. But the empire that built all of it is already hollow. A great name attached to almost nothing. A shell that looks strong from the outside and crumbles at the first real blow. And the man holding that hollow inheritance, the man whose decisions will determine whether 5 centuries of human achievement survive or perish, is a poet who collects pigeons. He has 15 years to prepare for the end of his world. He spends them doing nothing. The rot begins with a purchase. Not a conquest. Not a revolution. Not an invasion. A transaction in a slave market 2,000 miles from Baghdad. In the 9th century, while the House of Wisdom is still producing breakthroughs that will reshape civilization, the Abbasid Caliphs face a problem they cannot solve with scholarship. Their Arab armies have grown dangerous, not to the empire's enemies, to the caliphs themselves. Tribal loyalties run deeper than loyalty to the throne. Regional ambitions turn every general into a potential rival. Factional grudges make every campaign a gamble, not against the enemy, but against the men supposedly fighting on the caliph's behalf. The caliphs need soldiers with no tribal affiliations, no family connections to exploit, no local power base to leverage. Men whose loyalty can be purchased, absolutely, permanently, without question. They find their answer beyond the Oxus River. In the steppe lands of Central Asia, young boys from Turkic tribes are bought by the thousands, taken from their families, converted to Islam, trained from childhood in the arts of war, organized into elite military units answerable to one man, Caliph. These slave soldiers are called gulams, or mamluks. Both words mean the same thing in Arabic. Owned. Property. They are supposed to be instruments, tools of caliphal power, without independent will, without agency, without ambition. It is the most catastrophic miscalculation in the dynasty's history. Within 2 generations, the tools control the masters. These Turkic military slaves, raised to fight, trained to command, bound to no tribe, loyal to no tradition except strength, realize something simple. The caliph depends on them for everything. Without their swords, he is a scholar in a robe. With their swords, they can decide who wears that robe. By the mid-10th century, they are appointing caliphs, deposing caliphs, killing caliphs who displease them. The commander of the faithful becomes a puppet, trotted out for Friday prayers, displayed at religious ceremonies, his name stamped on coins, his blessing invoked in sermons from Delhi to Morocco. But he cannot leave his own palace without permission from the men who are supposed to serve him. In 945, the humiliation becomes official. A Persian military dynasty called the Buyids marches into Baghdad and seizes control of the entire government. They do not bother overthrowing the caliph. That would require too much effort, and the religious legitimacy the Abbasids provide is still useful. Instead, they simply take over. The Buyid leader assumes the title Emir al-Amara, commander of commanders, and rules the empire in the caliph's name. The caliph himself is reduced to a pensioner, dependent on his captors for a daily allowance, a prisoner in his own capital, wearing a crown that means nothing. This arrangement, powerful strongmen ruling through puppet caliphs, defines Baghdad for the next 3 centuries. The Buyids give way to the Seljuks. The Seljuks fracture into competing factions. The once mighty Islamic Empire splinters into a patchwork of independent sultanates and city-states. Egypt goes its own way. Persia fragments into petty kingdoms. Central Asia slips entirely from Abbasid influence. By the 12th century, the Caliphate's actual territory has shrunk to central Iraq, a few dependent cities, the land immediately surrounding Baghdad. Nothing more. The caliphs still matter in theory. Sultans still seek their formal blessing. Coins still bear their names. Prayers still invoke their authority from one end of the Islamic world to the other. But symbolic authority and real power are very different things. And when a real threat arrives, a threat that cannot be managed with symbols and prayers and Friday sermons, there's nothing behind the symbol. Nothing at all. A great name, attached to a hollow shell, waiting to be crushed. The man who inherits this shell in 1242 is Al-Mustasim Billah. He is not supposed to be caliph. His older brother held the position, seemed destined to reign for decades. Then he dies unexpectedly. No adult sons. The succession falls to Al-Mustasim almost by default, the only available male of suitable age in the direct line. Nothing about him suggests he is ready for what is coming. Nothing about him suggests he even understands what is coming. He is a man of refined tastes. He loves calligraphy, the graceful sweep of Arabic script across fine paper. He collects manuscripts. He keeps an aviary of exotic birds. He spends hours observing his prized pigeons, hours that could be spent reading intelligence reports, hours that could be spent inspecting walls, hours that could be spent drilling soldiers or building alliances or stockpiling food. He spends them watching birds in peaceful times. These would be the qualities of a fondly remembered patron, a cultured man, a gentle ruler. But 1242 is not peaceful. The Mongol Empire has been expanding without pause for 30 years. Genghis Khan himself annihilated the Khwarezmian Empire between 1219 and 1221. Cities that resisted, Samarkand, Bokhara, Urgench, Merv, Nishapur, each one destroyed so completely that some never recovered. After Genghis dies in 1227, the conquests pause briefly, then resume. Northern China falls. Korea is subjugated. Russia is swept, Kiev destroyed. Europe terrified. Anatolia invaded. The Seljuks of Rum crushed at the Battle of Khos-Dag in 1243. The Mongols are closer to Baghdad than they have ever been. Warnings arrive at the Abbasid court. Year after year, ambassadors from the Mongol court carry demands for submission and tribute. Scouts report Mongol forces consolidating their hold on Persia, reducing the last pockets of resistance in the east, building supply lines. Al-Mustasim acknowledges each warning, expresses appropriate concern, nods at the reports, and returns to his pigeons. 15 years pass. 15 years of warnings ignored. 15 years of preparations unmade. 15 years of walls unmaintained, alliances unbuilt, armies untrained. Then in 1253, the Mongol world shifts, and the countdown begins. A new great Khan takes power. His name is Monk, grandson of Genghis. Unlike predecessors who focused on consolidation, Monk is an expansionist. He wants to finish what his grandfather started, and he has a plan. He divides the conquest between his brothers. Kublai Khan will complete the subjugation of China. Hulagu Khan will conquer everything west to the Mediterranean. Everything west includes Baghdad. Hulagu receives his orders and spends 2 full years preparing. This is not a raid, not a punitive expedition. This is a war of permanent conquest, total subjugation of the Islamic heartlands. Any power that refuses submission will be annihilated. The Abbasid Caliphate is named as a target, explicitly. The force Hulagu assembles is the largest the Mongol Empire has ever deployed in a single campaign. Over 100,000 Mongol cavalry, reinforced by Armenian knights under King Hethum, Georgian infantry, Persian auxiliaries, Turkic tribesmen from conquered territories, and 1,000 Chinese siege engineers. These are not ordinary soldiers. They are specialists, masters of technologies developed over centuries of siege warfare in China. Counterweight trebuchets that hurl stones with devastating precision. Explosive projectiles filled with gunpowder. Incendiary weapons, naphtha sprayed across walls. Tunneling techniques that collapse fortifications from beneath. Against this combination, mobile cavalry, fanatical auxiliaries, and Chinese engineering expertise, no fortress in the known world has stood. Hulagu's first target is the assassins. The Order of Assassins has terrorized the Islamic world from mountain strongholds in northern Persia for 150 years. Their fortress at Alamat, the Eagle's Nest, sits atop sheer rock. It has never been breached, never been taken. Every siege has failed. Hulagu takes it in 3 weeks. The Grandmaster is captured, executed. The order that made sultans and kings tremble for a century and a half, exterminated in a single campaign. The message reaches Baghdad in early 1257. Al-Mustasim finally understands the threat is real, but understanding and action are not the same thing. The treasury is nearly empty. Decades of corruption and mismanagement have drained it. The army numbers perhaps 50,000, many poorly trained, badly equipped, uncertain of their pay. The walls have not been properly maintained. No alliances exist with neighboring powers. And then, in the great audience chamber of the Abbasid palace, 2 men step forward with opposing answers. 2 advisors, 2 visions, 2 dooms. Ibn al-Alqami, the Grand Vizier, speaks first. His voice is low, controlled, brutal in its clarity. We cannot win this war. He lists the cities that resisted the Mongols: Samarkand, Bokhara, Merv, Nishapur. The Khwarezmian Empire, far more powerful than the Caliphate, annihilated in less than 3 years. The assassins, holding out for 150 years, fallen in weeks. He proposes submission. Pay tribute. Accept Mongol suzerainty. Retain the caliph's religious authority. Surrender political power to Mongol governors. The city survives. The libraries survive. The people survive. Pride is the only casualty. Submission is not death, he says. Resistance is death. Mujahid al-Din Aibeg steps forward before the echo fades. The Dawatar, commander of the Caliphate's military, a Mamluk slave soldier whose entire identity is built on honor, on service, on the willingness to die before he kneels. He does not hide his contempt. The Grand Vizier asks us to surrender without fighting, to kneel before pagans who worship the sky, to tell the Muslim world that the commander of the faithful, the successor to the Prophet himself, is a coward who trades dignity for safety. His voice rises. He speaks of strong walls, of the Tigris protecting the eastern flank, of flooding the approaches, of holding out until Egypt and Syria send relief. I would rather die defending these walls, he says, than live as a slave to Mongol masters. The Caliph sits between these 2 men, fire on one side, flood on the other, and he chooses neither. He rejects full surrender. He will not tear down the walls. He will not disband his army. He will not travel to Hulagu's camp to submit. He also rejects full mobilization. He does not strip the countryside of food. He does not recall soldiers from outlying garrisons. He does not reach out to Egypt or Syria. He does not order the walls strengthened. He does not stockpile supplies. Instead, he sends another diplomatic mission. More gifts, more flattering words, more vague promises. He believes a middle ground still exists. There is no middle ground. There never was. And every week of polite correspondence gives Hulagu's engineers more time to position their siege equipment. Every month of delay allows more troops to move into final position. By November 1257, 3 Mongol columns begin their advance. Northern column through Mosul, southern column through Khuzestan, central column, led by Hulagu himself, directly through the Zagros mountain passes. 3 forces converging from 3 directions, communicating through relay riders, moving in perfect coordination, like fingers closing into a fist. If this story has reached you, if you feel the weight of what is coming, then you understand why these histories cannot be forgotten. Subscribe now, because what happens next is the collision between 15 years of failed leadership and the most powerful military force the world has ever seen. And before the walls fall, before the bombardment begins, there's one last desperate charge, one last act of defiance. It rides straight into the most devastating trap in medieval military history. Aibeg does not wait for the Mongols to reach the walls. On January 11th, 1258, the Dawatr gathers every mounted soldier Baghdad can spare. 20,000 cavalry. Nearly everything the Caliphate has left on horseback. His plan is aggressive. Ride west. Find the approaching Mongol vanguard before it establishes siege positions. Strike hard. Strike fast. Show Hulagu that Baghdad will not die quietly. It is exactly what Hulagu wants him to do. The Abbasid cavalry rides westward. Intelligence reports place a Mongol force near the town of Anbar, roughly 50 miles from the capital. Aibeg believes he has found an isolated column, a vanguard that has outpaced the main army. If he can destroy it quickly, Baghdad buys time. The Mongols he finds at Anbar do not look like an elite force. Their formations are loose, disorganized. When the Abbasid cavalry approaches, some turn and flee. Others mill about in confusion. To Aibeg's experienced eye, they look like an outnumbered enemy caught off guard. He orders the charge. 20,000 horsemen thunder across the plain. Lances lowered, swords drawn, green banners of the Caliphate streaming behind them. This is the warfare they know. The glorious cavalry charge that once carried Islam from Arabia to Spain. The Mongols scatter, fleeing northward, panicking. Aibeg presses the pursuit. His cavalry stretches out across the plain. Faster horses outpace slower ones. Formations dissolve. Unit cohesion vanishes. Each rider chases an individual target. 5 miles from Anbar, the trap closes. To the north, a low ridge conceals 10,000 Mongol heavy cavalry. Fresh, rested, waiting. To the east, another force of equal size blocks the route back to Baghdad. The Mongols who had been fleeing in panic suddenly stop, wheel their horses, reform into disciplined ranks. The Abbasid cavalry is surrounded on 3 sides. Before Aibeg can reorganize his scattered forces, Hulagu's engineers execute the killing stroke. Upstream, men have been waiting for a signal. When it comes, they destroy the dikes holding back the waters of the Djel Canal, a tributary of the Tigris. Water surges across the plain. Within minutes, the ground beneath the Arab horses turns to mud. Within an hour, a swamp. The heavy war horses, bred for short charges on solid ground, founder in chest-deep water. Many simply stop moving, trapped in the muck, unable to advance, unable to retreat. Then the arrows come. Mongol archers ride along the edges of the flooded zone, volley after volley into the struggling mass of men and horses. The Arabs cannot charge, their horses cannot move. They cannot retreat. The water is deeper behind them. They cannot return fire. Their bows are outranged. They can only die. 12,000 Abbasid cavalry are killed in less than 3 hours. Thousands more are captured. Only a shattered remnant escapes back toward Baghdad. Among the survivors, Aibeg himself. His armor dented, his force halved, his strategy destroyed. Not by braver warriors, not by superior numbers, by planning, coordination, engineering. The landscape itself turned into a weapon. When word reaches Baghdad, confidence dies with it. The army that was supposed to defend the city, broken in a single afternoon. Merchants begin hiding their valuables. Wealthy families discuss escape routes. Common people look at each other with the same expression. The expression of those who know what is coming. On January 29th, the Mongol forces complete their encirclement. 3 columns join together around the city. From every direction, as far as the eye can reach, the horizon fills with enemy camps. Cooking fires at night make it look like Baghdad is surrounded by a constellation of fallen stars. Within 3 days, Chinese engineers seal the city completely. A continuous barrier, ditches, embankments, wooden palisades, encircles everything. No one enters. No one leaves. No messenger slips through. No citizen escapes. 1 million people. Prisoners. On February 1st, Hulagu gives the order. The first stone hits the southeastern wall just after dawn. Over 200 pounds of roughly shaped rock, hurled by a counterweight trebuchet standing 60 feet tall. Its throwing arm snaps forward with enough force to shatter bone. The stone arcs through gray morning sky, reaches its apex, descends toward Baghdad with the weight of a judgment. Then the second stone, the third, the 100th. Within an hour, the air vibrates. Individual impacts blur into continuous thunder. Dust erupts from the walls in billowing clouds. Defenders scramble for cover, their arrows useless against enemies standing hundreds of yards beyond range. The bombardment does not stop. Not at noon, not at dusk, not at midnight. The engineers calculated their trajectories in daylight. Darkness changes nothing. The accuracy holds. Stones fall at midnight the same way they fall at dawn. There is no safe place in Baghdad. Stones crash through rooftops in neighborhoods far from the walls. A family eating breakfast ceases to exist, their home collapsed into rubble. A merchant opening his shop is crushed by a boulder that traveled half a mile through the sky. On the third day, naphtha, clay pots filled with burning liquid launched over the walls. The Great Bazaar, where merchants traded goods from 3 continents for 5 centuries, burns for an entire day. Entire neighborhoods abandoned to flame. Smoke blankets the city so thick that noon becomes twilight. Children cough blood. The elderly simply stop breathing. By the 5th day, the southeastern wall, identified by Chinese engineers as the weakest point, has been reduced to rubble. On February 5th, a 40-foot section collapses entirely. A rough ramp of debris from the ground outside to the streets within. Mongol assault troops pour through within the hour. The fighting in the breach is savage. Close. Personal. Swords and axes in the rubble. Men grappling with daggers when there is no room to swing a longer weapon. The breach so choked with corpses that soldiers climb over the dead to reach the living. Abeg has positioned his remaining elite troops here. They hold barricades at every intersection. The desperation of men defending their families. But the mathematics of siege warfare do not care about desperation. Every defender who falls leaves a gap that cannot be filled. Every Mongol who falls is replaced by 2 more. Over the following days, 2 additional breaches open. The garrison, 50,000 at the start, dwindles to perhaps 15,000. The rest are dead, wounded, gone. On February 10th, Al-Mustasim attempts genuine negotiation, sends his eldest son Ahmad and the Grand Vizier to Hulagu's camp, offers unconditional surrender. Hulagu receives them with elaborate courtesy, listens patiently, then states his terms. The Caliph must come personally, prostrate himself. The army must surrender every weapon. The entire population must exit the city. No modifications, no middle ground, no compromise. On the morning of February 13th, Al-Mustasim dresses in black robes, the color of his dynasty, worn by every caliph for 500 years. He places the turban of succession upon his head. He wears no armor, carries no weapon. His attendants weep as they help him dress. He walks out to the shattered gates. 300 officials behind him, past the trebuchets that destroyed his walls, past the camps of soldiers who killed his army, past Armenians, Georgians, Persians, Turks, Muslims among them, marching under Mongol banners against the seat of Islam. Hulagu waits on a silk-covered throne. The 2 men regard each other. 5 centuries of Abbasid history, facing 50 years of Mongol conquest. Then the last commander of the faithful presses his face to the earth. What follows is not war. It is extermination. Christians are separated, spared at the request of Hulagu's Nestorian Christian wife, Dokuz Khatan. Jews are exempted. The Muslim majority, the vast body of Baghdad's people, is assembled in open fields, organized by neighborhood, held under guard. Many believe slavery awaits. Slavery is terrible, but survivable. They tell themselves they will endure. Their children will survive. They are wrong. The killing begins on February 13th, continues for 7 days. Systematic, in organized shifts, so the soldiers do not tire. Men first, then women, then children, the elderly, the infants, the scholars, the illiterate, the wealthy, the destitute. How many die? 90,000? 200,000? Some sources claim 1 million. The true number will never be known. What is known? The fields outside Baghdad become so saturated with blood that the soil remains dark for years. The Tigris carries bodies downstream for months. Fishermen 50 miles away report corpses on the banks. Inside the city, a parallel destruction unfolds. Soldiers enter the House of Wisdom. They kick open doors, expecting gold. They find paper. Shelf after shelf. Room after room. Floor to ceiling. Nothing but paper covered in markings they cannot read. Some search behind the manuscripts for hidden treasure. Others begin throwing books outside, clearing space to sleep in a building with an intact roof. By nightfall, the courtyard of the greatest library in human history lies buried under a mountain of discarded knowledge. Then someone decides the paper makes good kindling. 400 years of irreplaceable scholarship, feeding cooking fires, live by men who cannot read a single word of what they burn. What the flames do not consume, the river swallows. Soldiers hurl manuscripts directly into the Tigris. The river turns black with dissolved ink. So many books enter the water that they form bridges of sodden paper. Soldiers walk across them, trampling centuries of human achievement beneath their boots. Without a second thought. 3 men, 3 fates. Age-Baghdad does not surrender with the Caliph. He barricades himself in the military quarter with a few hundred loyal troops. They fight until their arrows are spent, then swords, then bare hands. A Mongol officer offers him the chance to surrender and serve the Khan. Age-Baghdad spits at his feet. They kill him where he stands. Ibn al-Alqami is spared, appointed administrator of the ruins, a city of corpses and ashes, populated by a handful of survivors who look at him with hatred that will outlive them both. He dies within the year. Some say shame, others say poison. History brand him traitor, the scapegoat who carries the blame for 5 centuries of decay. Al-Mustasim is kept alive for several days. Hulagu extracts every last piece of information about hidden wealth. Then, on February 20th, the execution. Mongol tradition forbids spilling royal blood upon the earth, so the Caliph is wrapped in a carpet, laid on the ground. Horses are driven over him, again and again, until his body is crushed. His sons are killed the same way. Within hours, every male of the Abbasid line in Baghdad is dead, a dynasty stretching back 500 years to the Prophet's own companions, extinguished in a single afternoon. The city is dead. The Caliph is dead. The House of Wisdom is ash on the wind and ink in the river. But this is not the end, because the shockwave from those 13 days does not stop at Baghdad's walls. It radiates outward, across 3 continents, through 7 centuries, and the world that exists on the other side of it is not the same world that existed before. The messenger reaches Damascus in early March. He has ridden for 3 weeks. Changing horses at every stop, sleeping only when exhaustion drags him from the saddle. His face is gaunt, his clothes are ruined, his eyes hold something that does not leave them, the stare of a man who has witnessed what cannot be unseen. Baghdad has fallen, the Caliph is dead, the House of Wisdom is destroyed, the Mongol army is already moving west. For a long moment silence, then the wailing begins. The news travels along trade routes. Refugees carry it. Scholars who escaped write letters describing what they saw, in terms that strain belief. Surely this is exaggeration. Surely the seed of Islam cannot simply be gone. But the messengers keep coming, and their stories do not change. Some believe the day of judgment has arrived. The forces of Gog and Magog, prophesied to ravage the earth before the final reckoning. The world must be ending. The world does not end, but something else does. In Syria, the Ayyubid Sultan al-Nasir Yusuf faces the same impossible choice that destroyed al-Mustasim. Submit, fight, flee. He chooses the same response, paralysis. When Hulagu's forces reach Syria in late 1259, they find a kingdom already broken by indecision. Damascus falls without a siege. Aleppo resists briefly and is massacred for its defiance. Al-Nasir is captured, paraded, executed when he outlives his usefulness. Within 18 months of Baghdad's destruction, the Mongol Empire stretches from Korea to the Mediterranean. It seems nothing in the world can stop them. One man disagrees. In Cairo, Sultan Qutuz of the Mamluk Sultanate receives the news with iron rather than tears. Egypt is now the last major Muslim power, standing between Hulagu and the ocean. If Egypt falls, the entire Islamic heartland belongs to the Mongols. Every mosque, every city, every prayer. When Mongol ambassadors arrive in Cairo demanding submission, the same demand that preceded every destruction, Qutuz does not negotiate, does not flatter, does not send gifts. He executes the ambassadors, cuts off their heads, displays them on the gates of Cairo. The message requires no translation. Egypt will fight. Egypt will die if it must. But Egypt will not kneel. September 1260. A valley in Palestine, near the town of Nazareth. The spring of Ain Jalut, spring of Goliath. The Mamluk army, perhaps 20,000 strong, positions itself to block the Mongol advance. The Mongol force is smaller than usual. Hulagu himself has returned to Mongolia for succession disputes after Monk's death. He has left a force under his general Kitbuka, a Nestorian Christian, a veteran of Baghdad and Syria, a commander who has never lost. The Mamluks use the Mongols' own weapon against them. A portion of the Egyptian cavalry engages, fights briefly, then flees in apparent panic. Kitbuka orders pursuit. His forces stretch out across the valley, break formation, chase what they believe is a routed enemy. The trap closes. Qutuz has hidden the bulk of his army in the surrounding hills. When Mongols are fully committed, the hidden forces strike from every direction. The hunters become the hunted. Kitbuka fights until the end, his horse killed beneath him. He continues on foot. When his soldiers fall around him, he refuses surrender. He is captured alive, barely, and executed. His head joins the ambassadors on Cairo's gates. Ain Jalut is the first major Mongol defeat in decades. It does not end Mongol power. The Ilkhanate rules Persia and Mesopotamia for another 80 years. Mongol armies raid Syria repeatedly. The threat does not fully recede for generations. But Ain Jalut proves one thing. The unstoppable force has limits. The terror that destroyed Baghdad, that annihilated the Caliphate, that threatened to consume the entire Islamic world, that terror can be beaten. Egypt survives. Cairo inherits something of Baghdad's role as a center of Islamic learning and culture. But inheritance is not restoration. What drowned in the Tigris stays drowned. What burned in the cooking fires stays burned. The house of wisdom is never rebuilt. Not the building, the system, the network of scholars, the tradition of translation, the culture of research, the institutional framework that sustained 5 centuries of discovery. You cannot rebuild a culture with bricks and mortar. The funding disappears. The Abbasid Caliphs who sponsored scholarship for centuries are dead. The Mongol Khans who replaced them have different priorities. Nothing comparable to the sustained investment that fueled the Golden Age ever materializes again. And something deeper shifts. Something in the collective mind of the Islamic world. Before Baghdad, Muslim scholars approach knowledge with aggressive curiosity. They challenge ancient authorities, trust their observations, believe they can understand God's creation through reason and study. After Baghdad, a more cautious posture takes hold. If God permitted the destruction of Islam's greatest city, perhaps human reason is less reliable than scripture. Perhaps knowledge was a distraction. Perhaps the pursuit of learning led the faithful away from what truly mattered. The argument is devastatingly simple. Look where all that learning got us. Religious conservatives who had always viewed natural philosophy with suspicion now find eager audiences. The balance between reason and revelation, held in creative tension for 5 centuries, tips decisively toward revelation. The shift is gradual, but relentless. Over the following centuries, the Islamic world's scientific output declines. Europe's accelerates. By the 16th century, the positions are reversed entirely. And here is the part that most of the Western world never learns. The European Renaissance, that celebrated rebirth of classical learning, is built on foundations laid by the civilization the Mongols destroyed. Aristotle reaches Thomas Aquinas through translations made in Baghdad. Algebra reaches European mathematicians bearing the fingerprints of Al-Khwarizmi. Astronomy reaches Copernicus through corrections and observations made by Islamic scholars who studied in the House of Wisdom. Europe inherits what Baghdad gathered, minus the centuries of additional development that would have occurred had the experiment not been terminated in February 1258. The Mongol Empire does not outlast its victims by long. Hulagu dies in 1265. His Ilkhanate fragments by 1335. Within 200 years of Baghdad's fall, the Mongol Empire vanishes from history entirely. The conquerors convert to the religions of the conquered. Hulagu's descendants become Muslims. They build mosques on the ruins of cities they destroyed. The destroyers are destroyed, not by armies, but by time. Yet their destruction endures. The libraries stay burned. The scholars stay dead. The knowledge stays erased. The Mongols pass from the scene, but the absence they created remains. Permanent, irreversible, absolute. Baghdad's population, which exceeded 1 million, does not reach that number again for 700 years. Building takes centuries. Destroying takes days. The Tigris still flows through Baghdad. The river that once ran black with ink and red with blood now carries the ordinary traffic of a modern city. Children swim in its waters during summer months. Fishermen cast their lines as their ancestors did 1,000 years ago. No memorial marks the spot where the books were thrown in. No monument identifies where the House of Wisdom stood. No museum displays the texts that were lost, because those texts no longer exist. The absence is the memorial. 7.5 centuries after the Mongols departed, the absence endures. The next time you write a number, remember where it came from. The next time you look up at a star named by a scholar in Baghdad, remember what was lost. The next time you walk into a hospital that treats you regardless of wealth, remember whose idea that was. Share this video, not for this channel, for the million who perished, for the knowledge that drowned, for the scholars who died trying to save their manuscripts. They cannot speak for themselves. Their voices were silenced 766 years ago, but you can remember them. This has been Dark History Untold, where the truth stays buried until now.